For 33 years, I, Claire, believed my family's love was a complicated but unbreakable bond. That was the fundamental lie I lived through every silent Sunday dinner and every cutting remark. I thought their disapproval of my fiancé, Daniel, was just a phase, a misunderstanding they'd eventually overcome. Then, at a strained lunch in a Ridgemont restaurant, my sister Lauren pushed back from the table, leaving her phone face down. Its screen, still glowing, held a notification from a group chat. In the next 8 seconds, my entire world shattered. What did I see? A parallel chat called Monroe Family. Without me. Lauren's, she's actually going through with it, LOL. My mother's, a plumber in front of people. I can't even say it at book club. And a bet from my brother-in-law on how long my marriage would last. 18 months. Underway under. My mother, still smiling, sipping sparkling water, sat across from me, completely oblivious that her carefully constructed facade had just crumbled. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story resonates with you, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. This one took me a long time to tell. It started 4 months before the wedding at my mother's house in Ridgemont, Ohio. A split-level she'd decorated like a magazine and maintained like a resume. Every Sunday dinner was an audition. Diane Monroe sat at the head of the table like she'd earned that chair through combat. And in a way, she had. After my father left her for a woman with a lakefront house and a family trust, my mother rebuilt herself out of pure refusal to be pied again. She starched the tablecloths. She joined the garden club. She made sure her daughters married right. Or at least one of them did. My sister Lauren had married Brad Pierce 3 years earlier at the Ridgemont Country Club. 200 guests, a 5-tier cake, a write-up in the local paper. That was the standard. That was the scoreboard. So when I opened the cedar box my grandmother F.A. had left me and lifted out her wedding veil, hand-stitched lace, yellowed at the edges with 2 tiny initials embroidered near the temple in thread so fine you had to hold it to the light. My mother didn't say it was beautiful. She said, "Where's the ceremony?" "The club book's out 18 months. Lauren leaned over. "I can send you photos from mine for inspiration." I ran my thumb across those initials. FMA Monroe. My grandmother had married a man who dug wells for a living, and she'd stayed with him 47 years. I wondered what she'd written in that thread. There was a tiny line of stitching I couldn't quite read, curling along the seam. I folded the veil carefully and said nothing. Some answers come when they're ready. 2 weeks later, I called my mother to tell her about Daniel. I'd rehearsed it in the car. Name first, then how we met. On a municipal waterline project where his crew was laying pipe, and I was inspecting load-bearing calculations for the overpass above. He had been standing in a trench in steel-toed boots, reading a spec sheet, and he looked up and asked if the beam tolerances accounted for thermal expansion. Not many pipe fitters ask structural engineers about thermal expansion. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was that he listened to the answer. But my mother didn't get that far. I said his name. I said we'd been together 14 months. I said he'd proposed on a Sunday morning over coffee. No ring yet, just the question. And that I'd said yes before he finished the sentence. She asked what he did. I told her the truth. He'd started as a pipe fitter's apprentice at 17, worked his way into running his own water infrastructure operation. She heard one word, a plumber. Her voice dropped the way it drops when she's about to close a door and make sure you feel the draft. "You'll disgrace this entire family." The line cut. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone to my ear, listening to the dial tone, counting the seconds before I accepted that she'd actually hung up. I called back. Lauren answered. "Mom can't talk right now," she said. I heard the television in the background.
"No urgency."
"She's upset, Claire." Honestly, I don't blame her. I asked Lauren if she'd come to the wedding. She laughed one short breath through her nose. "I'll call you back." She didn't. Lauren did call back 4 days later while I was reviewing load specs at my desk. She didn't say hello. "Mom's not coming," she said. "And honestly, Claire, I'd rather miss my own funeral than watch you do this." I set my pen down. I asked her if she'd met Daniel. She hadn't. I asked if she'd asked a single question about him, his work, his character, where he grew up, what he cared about. She hadn't done that either. "I don't need to," she said. "I know what a plumber is." I hung up on her that time. It was the first time in 33 years I'd ended a call with my sister. That evening, I drove to Daniel's place, a 3-bedroom he'd bought outright, no mortgage, in a quiet neighborhood south of the city. The walls were clean, the furniture was solid, nothing flashy. On the fireplace mantel, between a stack of trade journals and a framed photo of his crew, sat a small brass pipe coupling, old, dull, about the size of a fist. I'd noticed it before, but never asked. That night, I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. "What's this one?" I asked. Daniel was at the kitchen counter, slicing bread. He didn't look up. "First thing I ever fixed that held," he said. "Crawl space in a duplex on Route 9. I was 17. The homeowner's pipes had been leaking for 2 months, and 3 guys before me couldn't get the joint to seal. He said it the way most people say, they once tied their shoes. No drama, just a fact." I put the coupling back on the mantel and didn't ask how big his company was. It didn't seem like the right question. Not yet. My Aunt Ruth was the one who explained my mother. Ruth was Diane's younger sister, 64, retired school nurse, lived alone in a bungalow with a porch swing and no pretensions. She drove up the Saturday after I'd told the family, sat at my kitchen table, and drank 2 cups of black coffee before she said a word. Then she told me a story I'd only heard pieces of. When I was 5 and Lauren was 8, my father left. Not gradually. One Thursday, he was at dinner. The next, he was in a condo on the east side of town with a woman named Patricia, who owned a chain of dry cleaners and a house that made our split level look like a storage unit. Ruth said the town wasn't kind about it. Diane's friends whispered. The garden club went quiet when she walked in. One woman at church asked if Diane had seen it coming. Ruth's voice got low. "Your mother spent 5 years being the woman everyone felt sorry for. She swore, and I mean swore, Claire, on your grandmother's grave, that her girls would never be looked down on again. Lauren's wedding was her proof. Every orchid, every place setting, every photo in the Ridgemont Register. That was your mother saying, 'We made it. We're not the ones you pity anymore.'" Ruth set her mug down. "Now you're marrying a man who works with his hands. And to your mother, that's not a man." That's the whole town laughing at her all over again. I understood it then, not forgave. Understood. My mother wasn't protecting me. She was protecting the version of herself she'd rebuilt out of tablecloths and country club invitations. I was just the wall she couldn't afford to let crack. I sent the wedding invitation into the family group chat on a Wednesday afternoon. The chat was called Monroe Family. My mother had created it 3 years earlier, the week of Lauren's engagement, and it had been active ever since. Birthdays, holiday plans, Lauren's vacation photos, my mother's garden club updates. I posted a photo of the invitation. A cream cardstock, simple font, Daniel's name and mine, the date, the small chapel on Sycamore Street. I typed, "We'd love to have you there." The message showed as delivered, then read by Lauren at 4:12 p.m., by my mother at 4:14, by Brad at 4:21. No one replied. Not a word, not a thumbs up, not even a question mark. I watched the chat for 2 hours. Nothing. The next morning, I opened it again and noticed something odd. The chat had gone completely silent. No new messages at all, which was unusual for a thread that normally pinged 6 or 7 times a day with Lauren's kids' photos or my mother's dinner plans. It was as if they'd stopped talking or stopped talking where I could see it. I told myself I was being paranoid. I put the phone down and went to work. But that silence, that specific, sudden, total silence, sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't cough up. It stayed there for weeks, heavy and round and smooth. And every time I picked up my phone and saw that empty thread, I felt it shift. I didn't know yet what they were saying in a different chat. I'd find out at the worst possible moment, sitting across from my mother with a fork in my hand and my sister's phone glowing on the table. Brad Pierce was the kind of man who introduced himself by his company name. Brad Pierce. Pierce Builders. He'd say it at barbecues, at Lauren's kids' birthday parties, at the grocery store if someone stood still long enough. He ran a mid-sized commercial contracting firm that did strip malls and office park renovations. And he wore it like a badge that said he'd made it past the trades and into the real game. 2 months before the wedding, Lauren hosted a dinner and made a point of inviting me. "So we can talk like adults," she said, which meant so Brad could talk, and I could listen. He waited until the main course. "Look, I get it," Brad said, leaning back in his chair with a glass of wine he couldn't quite afford. "Trades are fine. Somebody's got to unclog toilets, but there's a difference between the guys who swing wrenches and the guys who sign the checks, you know." He looked at Daniel's empty chair. I'd come alone. Like it proved his point. "I'm just saying, Claire, it's not about money. It's about trajectory." What Brad didn't mention was that Pierce Builders had lost 2 major bids that quarter. What he didn't mention was the credit line he'd extended twice, or the equipment loan coming due in 60 days. I knew because I worked in construction, not his sector. But the world is smaller than people think, and contractors talk. The man sitting across from me in a pressed shirt explaining the difference between wrenches and checks was 3 bad months from needing someone with a bigger operation to throw him a subcontract. He just didn't know yet whose operation that would be. My mother called a few weeks after the engagement. No congratulations, no questions about the man I was going to marry. She opened with a suggestion. "When people ask what he does," she said, "you could say he's in infrastructure engineering. It's not a lie. It's just cleaner." I was in my car in the parking lot of a job site eating a granola bar. I said, "No." She didn't pause. "Claire, I'm trying to help you. You don't know what people say." "I hear it." At the salon, at book club, Diane's younger one is marrying a plumber. "Do you know what that does to me?" I said I did know. I said it did the same thing to her that it did when Dad left. It made her feel seen, and not in the way she wanted. The silence on the line could have frozen a river. "I just won't have this family disgrace twice," she said. There it was again. Disgrace. The same word, the same weapon aimed at the same place. She wanted me to sand the truth down until it fit in her display case. Infrastructure engineering instead of pipe fitter, something she could say at book club without her voice tightening. I told her I wouldn't lie about the man I was marrying. She said I was being selfish. I said I'd rather be selfish than ashamed of a man who'd never done anything to earn shame. She hung up. The call lasted 4 minutes. When I got back to the job site, one of the 4 men asked if I was all right. I said yes. I wasn't sure that was true, but I knew I was closer to all right than I'd be if I'd said yes to my mother. Lauren posted vacation photos that spring. Hilton Head, a beachfront rental, matching outfits for the kids. The captions were careful. Blessed, making memories. Pierce family adventures. I scrolled past them the way you scroll past a car commercial. Pretty expensive, someone else's. What I noticed, because I worked in the same industry ecosystem as Brad, was the cracks behind the photos. A subcontractor I knew mentioned that Pierce Builders had been slowing invoices. Another said Brad had bid aggressively on a county library renovation and lost to a firm half his size. At Lauren's Easter brunch, which I attended alone because Daniel was not invited and we both knew it, Brad cornered me by the kitchen island. "Big things coming," he said, ice clinking in his glass. "Got my eye on a state contract, water treatment facility expansion." He said it the way a man says he's about to buy a boat. Loud and confident, and hoping volume would cover the gap between the dream and the bank balance. I nodded. I didn't mention that water treatment facility expansions were exactly the kind of project Daniel's company had been doing for 15 years. I didn't mention that the state contract Brad was eyeing would require bonding capacity he almost certainly didn't have. I just said, "Good luck with it, Brad." Lauren appeared at his elbow, fresh lip gloss, and steered the conversation to a kitchen renovation she was planning. Italian tile, custom cabinetry, a number that made my teeth hurt. On the drive home, I thought about the credit card I'd watched get declined at a restaurant the month before when Lauren tried to pay for lunch, and the waiter brought it back with an apology. Italian tile. Sure. Daniel told me the full story on a quiet Sunday evening, sitting on the back porch with 2 beers and the sound of early spring peepers. He'd grown up in Kinsman, a town so small the gas station was also the post office. His father drove a delivery truck. His mother worked at a school cafeteria. There was no college fund, no family business, no safety net. At 17, He'd answered a newspaper ad for a pipe fitter's apprentice and spent his first 3 months crawling through basement and crawl spaces so tight he had to turn sideways. I slept in my car for 6 weeks, he said. Saved enough for a room, then saved enough for tools, then saved enough to hire one guy. He went inside and came back with the brass coupling from the mantel. He turned it in his hands. The metal was dark with age, a green patina along one edge. The duplex on Route 9, he said. Lady had been putting buckets under her kitchen sink for 2 months. 3 plumbers came out, patched it, left, leaked again, every time. I was 17, and I didn't know enough to be scared. So I tore the whole joint apart and rebuilt it from scratch. Took 4 hours. It held. He set the coupling on the porch railing. That's the one. 21 years, and it's still holding. I picked it up. It was warm from his hands. I knew his company ran water contracts across Ohio and 2 neighboring states. I knew he employed enough people to fill a small auditorium. But Daniel wore success the way he wore his work boots. Broken in, unpolished, functional. The number on his balance sheet had never once been the reason I reached for his hand. Birthdays, holiday plans, Lauren's vacation photos, my mother's garden club updates. I posted a photo of the invitation. Cream cardstock, simple font, Daniel's name and mine. The date, the small chapel on Sycamore Street. I typed, "We'd love to have you there." The message showed as delivered, then read by Lauren at 4:12 p.m., by my mother at 4:14, by Brad at 4:21. No one replied. Not a word, not a thumbs up, not even a question mark. I watched the chat for 2 hours. Nothing. The next morning, I opened it again and noticed something odd. The chat had gone completely silent. No new messages at all, which was unusual for a thread that normally pings 6 or 7 times a day with Lauren's kids' photos or my mother's dinner plans. It was as if they'd stopped talking or stopped talking where I could see it. I told myself I was being paranoid. I put the phone down and went to work. But that silence, that specific, sudden, total silence, sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't cough up. It stayed there for weeks, heavy and round and smooth. And every time I picked up my phone and saw that empty thread, I felt it shift. I didn't know yet what they were saying in a different chat. I'd find out at the worst possible moment, sitting across from my mother with a fork in my hand and my sister's phone glowing on the table. Brad Pierce was the kind of man who introduced himself by his company name. Brad Pierce. Pierce Builders. He'd say it at barbecues, at Lauren's kids' birthday parties, at the grocery store, if someone stood still long enough. He ran a mid-sized commercial contracting firm that did strip malls and office park renovations. And he wore it like a badge that said he'd made it past the trades and into the real game. 2 months before the wedding, Lauren hosted a dinner and made a point of inviting me. "So we can talk like adults," she said, which meant so Brad could talk and I could listen. He waited until the main course. "Look, I get it," Brad said, leaning back in his chair with a glass of wine he couldn't quite afford. "Trades are fine. Somebody's got to unclog toilets, but there's a difference between the guys who swing wrenches and the guys who sign the checks, you know." He looked at Daniel's empty chair. I'd come alone. Like it proved his point. "I'm just saying, Claire, it's not about money. It's about trajectory." What Brad didn't mention was that Pierce Builders had lost. In the weeks before the wedding, Daniel started taking calls after dinner, stepping onto the porch, speaking in the low, careful voice he used when numbers were large and timelines were tight. I caught fragments through the screen door. Multi-state federal allocation. The announcement. He came back inside one evening and sat down with a look I'd only seen once before when he'd landed his first municipal contract 15 years ago. "Things might get loud soon," he said. I asked what he meant. He shook his head. "Not secretive, just cautious. I don't want to jinx it, but if it goes through, you'll hear about it." I let it sit. Daniel wasn't a man who made noise before there was something to make noise about. And I'd learned to trust the rhythm of how he shared things slowly, precisely, when the facts were final. Meanwhile, the local news ran a segment I barely noticed at the time. A reporter standing in front of a water treatment plant talking about aging infrastructure across the Midwest. Pipes installed in the 1950s reaching the end of their lifespan. Federal modernization dollars flowing into public-private partnerships. The question, the reporter said, is which private firms are positioned to handle projects of this scale. I was folding laundry. I glanced at the screen and went back to matching socks. The segment ended with the statistic. 43% of Ohio's municipal water systems needed upgrades within 5 years. I thought about Daniel on the porch talking about multi-state timelines, and I felt something shift. Not alarm, not excitement, but the quiet awareness that a very large thing was moving toward us. And the only people who didn't see it coming were the ones who'd never bothered to look. Brad lost the state contract 2 weeks before the wedding. I heard about it through the construction grapevine before Lauren posted a single word. A colleague mentioned at a project meeting that Pierce Builders had been passed over for the water treatment facility expansion Brad had been chasing for months. The contract went to a firm with better bonding capacity and deeper municipal experience. Brad's firm didn't even make the shortlist. That same week, Lauren led her kitchen renovation. She told Instagram it was a design change, but a mutual acquaintance told me she'd returned the Italian tile deposit. Brad took a short-term loan against equipment he still owed money on. The man who'd sat across from me explaining the difference between wrenches and checks was now leveraging his wrenches to cover his checks. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt the grim recognition that comes from watching someone's scaffolding start to sway. You can see the math. You know which bolts are missing. And you know they won't ask for help until the whole structure is on the ground. Lauren's posts got quieter. Fewer beach photos. Fewer blessed captions. My mother mentioned in a rare text that Brad's having a tough quarter, but offered no details and asked no questions about my own life. The Monroe family group chat, the one I was actually in, stayed silent. The one I wasn't in, I imagined, was busier than ever. But I had other things on my mind. A wedding in 2 weeks with a guest list that was getting shorter on one side, and a groom who'd spent every evening that week on the porch talking quietly about something he wasn't ready to name. The week before the wedding, my mother invited me to lunch. Just me. Girls only, she said, as if Daniel's exclusion were a fun tradition and not a deliberate one. She picked a restaurant in Ridgemont, the kind with cloth napkins and a wine list she'd memorized. Lauren was already seated when I arrived, phone face down on the table beside her bread plate, the screen lighting up every few seconds with notifications she kept glancing at and ignoring. My mother ordered for the table, without asking. Salads, sparkling water, a tone that said, "We're going to be civilized about this." For 20 minutes, she talked about Lauren's kids, a neighbor's divorce, a woman at the salon who'd gained weight. She did not mention Daniel. She did not mention my wedding. She did not ask about my work. Then she folded her hands and said, "Claire, I want you to know the door is always open. When you're ready to come to your senses, to really come to your senses, we'll be here." I asked her what come to your senses meant. She tilted her head. "You know what it means." Lauren looked at her plate. Her phone buzzed again, and the screen lit up. A notification from a group chat I could see at an angle. The name of the chat had a red heart emoji after it. The phone was foreign from my hand when Lauren excused herself to the restroom. She left it right there, screen still on, still glowing. I should have looked away. Instead, I looked down. What I saw in the next 8 seconds changed every conversation I'd have with my family for the rest of my life. But Lauren was already pushing back from the table, so I held still and waited. The chat was called Monroe Family. Same name as the one I was in. Different chat, different members. My mother, Lauren, Brad, not me. The preview showed the last several messages stacked on top of each other, and in the 8 seconds before the screen dimmed, I read enough to feel the floor shift. Lauren had written, "She's actually going through with it, LOL." My mother had replied, "A plumber in front of people. I can't even say it at book club." Brad, "Give it 18 months. I'll take that bet." Lauren, underway under. Then my mother, the last message visible. "We don't even know what he really does. She's throwing away everything I built for this family over a man with a wrench." I set my water glass down carefully. I did not pick up the phone. I did not screenshot it. I didn't need to. Every word was already burned into the back of my skull. Sharp and permanent. The way certain sentences become part of your skeleton the moment you hear them. 18 months. A bet. A man with a wrench. I waited for it to hurt, and it did, but differently than I expected. It wasn't the white, hot anger I'd felt when my mother hung up. It was colder, clearer, like reading a blueprint and finally seeing the structural failure you'd been looking for. Right there, obvious load-bearing and not fixable with patching. Lauren came back from the restroom, picked up her phone without glancing at it, and smiled. So, what did I miss? My mother laughed. I cut my salad into very small pieces and finished the meal. I smiled at every appropriate moment. I drove home without turning on the radio. The silence was enough. I told Daniel that evening. He was at the kitchen table reviewing project bids, reading glasses on, a pen behind his ear. I sat across from him and described what I'd seen. The parallel chat, the bet, the phrase, a man with a wrench, my mother's line about not knowing what he really does. Daniel took off his glasses. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and held my hand. Said nothing for 30 seconds. And when he spoke, it was quiet. What do you want to do? I'd been asking myself that question since the drive home. Cancel the wedding, call my mother, confront Lauren, explain again who Daniel was, what he'd built, how wrong they were. But every version ended the same way. Me auditioning for people who'd already decided I was the disappointment. I was done. Nothing, I said. I'm done auditioning for people who already cast me as the understudy. Daniel squeezed my hand. He didn't offer to fix it. He didn't suggest I call Lauren or write a letter or try one more time. He didn't tell me they'd come around. He just held on. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the brass coupling on the mantel. The first thing that held 21 years. My mother's approval had never held. My sister's loyalty had never held. The only things in my life that held were the things I'd built myself. My career, my apartment, my judgment about the man sleeping next to me, and a brass pipe fitting from a duplex crawl space on Route 9 that a 17-year-old kid had refused to give up on. The wedding was in 6 days. I was going to walk down that aisle if I walked alone. The wedding was on a Saturday in late April. Small chapel, white walls, wood pews, afternoon light through plain glass windows. Daniel's side filled easily. His crew, his business partner, Garrett, a few childhood friends from the town where he'd grown up, his mother, who'd flown in from Tucson. My side had one person. Aunt Ruth sat in the front pew in a blue dress she'd ironed that morning, clutching a handkerchief she'd had since the 70s. Behind her, 12 empty pews. I stood in the back room alone and looked in the mirror. The veil was pinned in my hair. Grandma Faye's veil, the yellowed lace, the tiny initials near the temple. I ran my finger along the hidden line of stitching I hadn't been able to read at my mother's table. Now, in the brighter light, I could make out 3 words, hand-stitched so small they were almost invisible. Choose who stays. That was it. 3 words from a woman who'd married a well-digger and never once apologized. I adjusted the pins. I smoothed the lace over my shoulders. I looked at my own face and decided it was enough. The chapel coordinator knocked and said they were ready. I walked down the aisle with no one to give me away and no one to pretend the empty pews didn't matter. Aunt Ruth was crying before I reached the altar. Daniel was standing there in a gray suit he'd bought that week. And when I got close, he whispered, "You showed up." I whispered back, "So did you." We said our vows in front of 41 people, only one of whom shared my last name. The ceremony lasted 22 minutes. It was the best day of my life. I stood at that altar with one empty side of the room, and I want to say this to whoever is listening. The people who refuse to show up always have a reason that sounds like you and never is. If you've ever walked towards something good with an empty chair behind you, you're not alone here. Stay with me. Comment, "I walked anyway, and let's keep going." For 3 days after the wedding, there was only quiet. Daniel had a water main project in Dayton starting Monday. I had a mixed-use development review first thing Tuesday morning. We celebrated by picking up pizza on the way home and eating it on the tailgate of Daniel's 12-year-old truck in the driveway. Sat in the dark with our legs hanging over the edge and the cardboard box between us. And I thought, this is exactly right. No champagne, no resort, just a man who gets up before 5 and a woman who reads load calculations for fun, sitting on a truck that's older than our relationship. My mother would have hated every second of it. The phone stayed quiet. The group chat stayed dead. And for 3 days, I let myself believe the hardest part was behind me. It happened on a Tuesday, 3 days after the wedding. I was on a job site, standing on the second floor of a half-finished parking structure, reviewing rebar placement with a contractor when my phone started vibrating in my vest pocket. One buzz, then another, then a third, fourth, fifth. A chain of notifications, so fast the phone felt like it was trying to escape. I pulled it out. Text from a college friend. Is this your Daniel? Text from a coworker. Turn on channel 4. Text from my project manager. Claire, congratulations. Call me. 3 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I excused myself from the contractor, walked to the edge of the structure where the wind was sharp and the noise was low, and opened the news app on my phone. The headline loaded, then the photo. Then the rest of my morning collapsed into a single held breath. I'd known Daniel's company was successful. Contracts in 4 states, over 1,000 employees, the kind of municipal operation that keeps entire towns running. But what I was reading wasn't about the company I'd understood. It was something else entirely, a scope I hadn't seen coming. The man I'd married, the man I thought I knew the measure of, had just been named the lead partner on something that puts a person on the front page and keeps them there. My phone buzzed again and again. I gripped the railing with one hand and held the phone with the other and read the article twice. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I wanted to make sure I was reading the real scale of what Daniel had been building in the quiet of those porch calls. It wasn't a dream. It was a Tuesday. And Daniel was on every channel. The Department of Infrastructure had announced a landmark public-private partnership for water system modernization across 4 Midwestern states: Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, and Kentucky. The lead private partner selected after an 18-month evaluation was Holt Civil and Water, Daniel's company. I'd known his company was substantial. I'd known about the municipal contracts, the regional scope, the teams he deployed across state lines, but this was a different order of magnitude. The article described it as the largest municipal water contract awarded to a private firm in a decade. Aging pipe, 47 communities, a contract value that I won't say out loud because the number isn't the point, but it was the kind of number that puts a person on every news desk in the Midwest. The news segment I'd barely noticed while folding laundry. That had been the lead-up. Every evening Daniel had spent on the porch saying multi-state and federal allocation. That was this. And the photo, the one every outlet ran, showed Daniel standing in the lobby of Whole Civil headquarters in front of a glass display case. Inside the case, mounted on a small wooden base with a brass plate beneath it, was a pipe coupling. Old, dull, about the size of a fist. The plaque read, "The first joint that held Route 9, 2005. Daniel had told me once that Garrett had the original mounted for the office years ago, but I'd never thought to ask why a pipe fitting would be in a lobby display case. Now, I knew it was the origin story of a company that had just been handed the infrastructure contract of the decade. We don't even know what he really does. My mother's words from the secret chat. Well, now everybody did. 97 calls. Not one of them came to the wedding, but all of them could dial fast once his face was on a screen. If you've ever watched silence turn into a flood the second people thought you had something worth taking, you already know the feeling in my chest right now. Tell me in the comments. Have you been on the other end of those calls? Subscribe and stay. The next part is the one I waited 6 weeks for. I drove home from the job site in silence, my phone face down on the passenger seat, vibrating so steadily it sounded like a small animal trapped under a blanket. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the count was at 97. 97 missed calls. My mother, Lauren, Brad, Aunt Ruth. Hers I'd return. 2 numbers from my mother's garden club. 1 from Brad's brother, who I'd met exactly once at a Christmas party. I picked up the phone and opened the group chat, the one I was still in. Monroe family. Months of silence. And now it was a waterfall. Lauren, Claire, honey, call me. My mother, so proud of you both. Always knew Daniel was special. Brad, just saw the news. Incredible. We should get together. I have some ideas for collaboration. My mother again. Call your mother, please. I scrolled through 17 messages in 90 seconds. Every single one arrived after 10:47 a.m., the exact minute the news broke. Before 10:47, the last message in the chat was my wedding invitation months ago. Read by all, answered by none. The first thing that held 21 years. My mother's approval had never held. My sister's loyalty had never held. The only things in my life that held were the things I'd built myself. My career, my apartment, my judgment about the man sleeping next to me, and a brass pipe fitting from a duplex crawl space on Route 9 that a 17-year-old kid had refused to give up on. The wedding was in 6 days. I was going to walk down that aisle if I walked alone. The wedding was on a Saturday in late April. Small chapel, white walls, wood pews, afternoon light through plain glass windows. Daniel's side filled easily. His crew, his business partner, Garrett, a few childhood friends from the town where he'd grown up, his mother, who'd flown in from Tucson. My side had one person. Aunt Ruth sat in the front pew in a blue dress she'd ironed that morning, clutching a handkerchief she'd had since the 70s. Behind her, 12 empty pews. I stood in the back room alone and looked in the mirror. The veil was pinned in my hair. Grandma Faye's veil, the yellowed lace, the tiny initials near the temple. I ran my finger along the hidden line of stitching I hadn't been able to read at my mother's table. Now, in the brighter light, I could make out 3 words, hand-stitched so small they were almost invisible. Choose who stays. That was it. 3 words from a woman who'd married a well-digger and never once apologized. I adjusted the pins. I smoothed the lace over my shoulders. I looked at my own face and decided it was enough. The chapel coordinator knocked and said they were ready. I walked down the aisle with no one to give me away and no one to pretend the empty pews didn't matter. Aunt Ruth was crying before I reached the altar. Daniel was standing there in a gray suit he bought that week. And when I got close, he whispered, "You showed up." I whispered back, "So did you." We said our vows in front of 41 people, only one of whom shared my last name. The ceremony lasted 22 minutes. It was the best day of my life. I stood at that altar with one empty side of the room, and I want to say this to whoever is listening. The people who refuse to show up always have a reason that sounds like you and never is. If you've ever walked towards something good with an empty I set the phone on the kitchen counter. I looked at the mantle. The coupling was gone at the office, now in a glass case on every news segment. In its place, Daniel had left a sticky note. "Back late. Don't check your voicemail. I love you." I almost laughed. I sat at the table where we'd eaten pizza out of a box 3 nights ago, and I let the phone ring. I didn't answer a single call. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I already knew what every one of them wanted, and none of it was me. My mother showed up at my door 2 days later. No phone call, no warning. Just Diane Monroe standing on my porch in her best blouse with mascara that had been freshly applied, holding a casserole dish like a peace offering and breathing the way she breathes when she's rehearsed something in the car. I let her in because it was raining. She sat on the couch and put the casserole on the coffee table and looked at the empty spot on the mantel where the coupling had been, and I watched her calculate. "Claire," she said, "I know things have been difficult. I know I wasn't perfect about all of this, but you have to understand I was scared for you. I was trying to protect you." I didn't speak. She pressed on. "I've been thinking. We're family, and family shows up for each other, right? I want to show up now. I want us to be close again, the way we were." I asked her when exactly we had been close. She blinked. Then she pivoted. Smooth, practiced, like changing lanes on a highway. "Brad's been having a hard time," she said. "His company, you know how construction is, ups and downs. I just thought now that Daniel's in such a good position, maybe there's a way for them to work together. Brad has 20 years of experience. It would be good for everyone." There it was. The casserole wasn't an apology. It was an invoice. She hadn't come because she missed me. She'd come because her other son-in-law's company was sinking and my husband's face was on television, and she saw a door she could walk through if she held a dish and cried at the right time. Lauren came next. The following weekend, she texted first, a long message full of words she'd never used with me before. "Thinking of you. So happy for you. We should grab coffee. Just us." She signed it with a heart emoji. The same heart emoji from the group chat I wasn't supposed to know about. Over coffee, Lauren was warm in a way that felt like putting on a coat that didn't fit. She complimented my hair. She asked about my work for the first time in years. She mentioned how proud she was of Daniel. Then, casual as weather, she said Brad had put together a capabilities packet for Holt Civil. Nothing formal, she said. Just an introduction. His crew does excellent finish work. It could be a great fit for the residential portions of the water project. I stir my coffee. You said you'd rather miss your own funeral than come to my wedding. Lauren flinched. She recovered fast. She'd always been fast. I was upset, Claire. I didn't mean it. You know how I get. I didn't know how she got. She got exactly the way our mother got. Saying whatever would close the sale and rewriting the past to make the transaction feel like love. We're family. She said family helps family. Family helps family. A few weeks ago, family was a group chat that bet 18 months on my marriage while I ate salad across the table. Now, family was a capabilities packet and a coffee date and a heart emoji deployed with the precision of a marketing campaign. I told Lauren I'd think about it. I wouldn't. But saying that bought me time, and time was the only currency I needed. I told Daniel about my mother's visit and Lauren's coffee pitch on the same night, sitting on the porch while fireflies blinked in the yard. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat quiet for a while, the way he always did when something mattered, letting the words settle before he responded. What do you want to do? He asked. Same question as before. Same quiet delivery. Same absence of pressure. I don't know yet, I said. Part of me wants to pretend it's fine. Let them back in. Absorb it. He nodded. And the other part wants them to understand that showing up after the news broke is not the same as showing up at the wedding. Daniel leaned back. The porch light caught the edge of his jaw, and he looked tired. Not from the work, but from watching me carry this. It's your family, he said. Your call. I'll stand wherever you stand. He didn't say they were wrong. He didn't say they were right. He didn't suggest forgiveness or revenge or strategy. He offered me the thing my family never had, the right to decide for myself, without someone rewriting the options. I sat with that for 3 days. I went to work. I came home. I ate dinner with a man who treated every person the same, whether they ran a company or unclogged a drain. And I thought about what it would look like to tell the truth. Not in anger, not in punishment, but clearly in front of people. The way you state the load on a beam. This is what it holds. This is what it doesn't. And this is where the failure line sits. The opportunity came 6 weeks after the wedding in the form of a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Holt Civil and Water was launching the first phase of the modernization project, a water treatment upgrade in a small Ohio town 30 mi south of Ridgemont. The event was public. Local press, 3 city council members, the mayor, a few state representatives, Daniel's team, community members. Garrett had organized it. When I saw the guest list, I noticed my mother's name wasn't on it. Lawrence wasn't either. Neither was Brad's. They'll come anyway, I told Daniel. He looked at me over his reading glasses. You think I know, and I did because the event was mentioned in the Ridgemont Register, a small item about local businessman Daniel Holt, and because Brad's company worked in commercial construction in the same county, and because my mother read the Register the way generals read field reports. Diane called on Thursday. We'd love to come support you, she said, her voice bright and public as if she were already at the event. Lauren texted. Brad would love to say hi to Daniel. Just a quick hello. I didn't respond to either. I didn't need to. They'd come. They'd dress up. They'd stand near Daniel and smile for any camera that happened to be pointing in their direction. And then when the moment was right, they'd ask for something. Access, a contract, a photo that proved they'd always been on the winning side. They all came to that one. Of course they did. My mother in pearls, Lauren in heels too high for a construction site, Brad in a blazer with a Pierce Builders card in his pocket. And I knew exactly what I was going to say. The ribbon cutting was at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday in early June. The site was a cleared lot next to the old water treatment facility, a podium, a row of folding chairs, a red ribbon stretched between 2 poles, press fans from 2 local stations, and the Ridgemont Register. Garrett stood near the podium checking the microphone. Daniel was in a suit, the same gray suit from our wedding, talking to the mayor. Aunt Ruth had driven down from her bungalow and was sitting in the second row in her blue dress, the same one she'd worn to the wedding, clutching the same handkerchief. My mother arrived 10 minutes early. She walked through the crowd like she was arriving at a fundraiser she'd chaired. Chin up, smile calibrated, hand extended to people she'd never met. "I'm Daniel's mother-in-law," she told a reporter. "We've always been so proud of him." The reporter wrote something down. Lauren appeared at her elbow. Brad a few steps behind, scanning the crowd for Daniel the way a salesman scans a room for the decision-maker. Brad found Garrett first. I watched him extend his hand, introduce himself, pull a card from his blazer pocket. Garrett took the card, glanced at it, and put it in his back pocket without reading it. Lauren positioned herself next to me and looped her arm through mine, a gesture she hadn't made since her own wedding. "This is amazing, Claire," she said. "You must be so proud." I looked at her arm and mine. I thought about the group chat. I thought about the bet. I thought about the 18 months she'd given my marriage and the funeral she'd rather attend. I smiled. "Let's find our seats," I said. The ceremony started with the mayor's remarks. 3 minutes about infrastructure, public investment, the importance of clean water. Then Garrett spoke about the company's history. Then Daniel stood at the podium, and for 2 minutes he talked about starting as an apprentice, about the duplex on Route 9, about the coupling that held when 3 others didn't. He didn't mention money. He didn't mention the contract value. He talked about pipes and communities, and the people who depend on water they don't think about until it stops running. The audience clapped. The press took photos. Daniel cut the ribbon with oversized scissors, and the crowd cheered. Afterward, during the reception, coffee, donuts, a folding table with brochures. Brad made his move. He pulled me aside near the refreshment table, his voice low and fast. "Claire, listen. 1 word from you to Daniel. That's all I need. Pierce Builders can handle the subcontract work on the residential tie-ins. I've got 20 years of experience." I looked at him. "Brad," I said, "you called my husband a guy who unclogs toilets." He laughed, nervous. "Come on, that was just talk." Behind us, my mother had positioned herself next to Daniel for a press photo. She was holding his arm and smiling at the camera. The same smile she used for garden club portraits, polished and practiced and completely empty. A reporter nearby turned to me. She had a notepad and a recorder. "Mrs. Holt, could I ask you a couple of questions?" I said yes. She asked how it felt to see Daniel's company recognized at this level. Then she asked the question that opened the door I'd been waiting to walk through. "Did your family always know about the scale of Daniel's work?" I looked at the reporter. I looked at my mother, still holding Daniel's arm. I looked at Lauren, standing 3 feet away with her phone out, recording for Instagram. I looked at Aunt Ruth in the second row, who had come to the wedding and the ribbon cutting and every moment in between without being asked and without conditions. Then I answered. "My family was invited to my wedding," I said. My voice was even conversational, the same tone I'd used to explain a load calculation, factual, precise, without heat. 1 person came. The reporter's pen stopped. My mother's hand loosened on Daniel's arm. "My mother told me my husband would disgrace this family." I continued. "My sister said she'd rather miss her own funeral than attend." My brother-in-law explained the difference between men who swing wrenches and men who sign checks. I paused. The silence around us was the kind that has weight. People leaning in, breath held, the specific quiet that forms when a room realizes something true is being said. None of them asked Daniel a single question about his work. Not one. They heard the word plumber, and they heard everything they needed to hear. I turned to my mother. She was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger yet, not tears yet, but the look of someone who just realized the ground they were standing on wasn't as solid as they'd thought. "You said a plumber would disgrace this family," I said to her. "So tell me, Mom, which one of us disgraced it?" The words left my mouth the way a beam settles into its final position. No force, no strain, just gravity. Doing what gravity does. My mother let go of Daniel's arm. The press photographer lowered his camera. Lauren put her phone down, and for 3 seconds, nothing moved. Then Diane Monroe did what Diane Monroe always does when the display case cracks. She tried to rebuild it in real time. "Claire," she said, her voice cracking in that precise, practiced way. "You don't understand what I went through. Everything I did was to protect this family, to protect you." Tears appeared. She pressed her hand to her chest. The performance was flawless. It would have worked at book club, at the salon, anywhere the audience hadn't seen the script. But here, in front of a reporter with a recorder and a crowd of people who'd watched her arrive 20 minutes ago, introducing herself as a proud mother-in-law, the performance didn't land. It fell flat. I could see it in the faces around us. The recognition, the math people do when the story doesn't add up. "I tried to protect you," she said again, louder, looking at the crowd for support. No one offered any. Then the mask dropped. Her jaw set. Her eyes went hard. "After everything I sacrificed," she said, her voice no longer cracking, but cracking anyway, in a different way. The real way. "After everything I gave you, and this is how you repay me in front of cameras, in front of strangers." I didn't raise my voice. I said, "Daniel chooses his own partners. I won't trade his name for a family that left a chair empty at my wedding." Lauren stepped forward, mouth open, then stopped. Brad took a half step back, his business card still in Garrett's back pocket. Aunt Ruth in the second row pressed her handkerchief to her mouth and nodded once. I looked at Lauren. "You said you'd rather miss your funeral." "I said you miss my wedding instead. I've made peace with both." My mother turned and walked through the crowd. The people who'd once pied her parted without a word. I found her outside past the reception tent, standing alone by the chain-link fence that separated the new construction from the old treatment plant. Her hands were shaking. The performance was over. The cameras were inside. Here in the gravel parking lot with the smell of turned earth and old concrete, my mother looked exactly as old as she was, 61, standing alone, the way she'd stood alone when my father walked out with his suitcases and his new address. She heard me approach, but didn't turn around. "I just didn't want you to be looked down on," she said. Her voice was small. Not performing, not lobbying, just small. "The way they looked at me after your father. I couldn't watch them do that to you too, Claire." And there it was, the real thing underneath the casserole and the book club and the pearls. Not cruelty, fear. A woman who'd been humiliated so deeply that she'd built her entire identity around making sure it never happened again. And who couldn't tell the difference between protecting her daughters and controlling them. I felt it. I let myself feel it. I didn't step closer. "I know, Mom," I said. "But somewhere along the way, you became the people who looked down on you." She didn't answer. She pressed her lips together the way she does when she's trying not to cry for real. And for a moment, she was just a woman in a parking lot who'd lost something she couldn't name. I stood there for 10 seconds. Then I went back inside. Daniel was standing near the podium talking to the mayor about Phase 2 timelines. When he saw me come in, he excused himself immediately, not rushed, just done, and walked over. He didn't ask how it went. Brad a few steps behind, scanning the crowd for Daniel the way a salesman scans a room for the decision-maker. Brad found Garrett first. I watched him extend his hand, introduce himself, pull a card from his blazer pocket. Garrett took the card, glanced at it, and put it in his back pocket without reading it. Lauren positioned herself next to me and looped her arm through mine, a gesture she hadn't made since her own wedding. "This is amazing, Claire," she said. "You must be so proud." I looked at her arm in mine. I thought about the group chat. I thought about the bet. I thought about the 18 months she'd given my marriage and the funeral she'd rather attend. I smiled. "Let's find our seats," I said. The ceremony started with the mayor's remarks. 3 minutes about infrastructure, public investment, the importance of clean water. Then Garrett spoke about the company's history. Then Daniel stood at the podium, and for 2 minutes he talked about starting as an apprentice, about the duplex on Route 9, about the coupling that held when 3 others didn't. He didn't mention money. He didn't mention the He could read it on my face the way he reads spec sheets. Carefully, completely, without needing the summary. He held out his hand. "Ready?" he said. I took it. His hand was warm and calloused and steady. The hand of a man who'd spent 20 years turning pipe fittings and contract proposals and early mornings into something that held. The same hand that had held mine across a kitchen table when I told him about the group chat. The same hand that had passed me pizza on a truck tailgate the night we got married. "Ready?" I said. We walked out together, past the folding chairs and the ribbon scraps and the coffee table into the June sunlight. Behind us, Aunt Ruth gathered her handkerchief and followed. Ahead of us, the new water lines stretched underground toward 47 communities that would have clean water because a 17-year-old kid once refused to leave a crawl space until the joint held. In the weeks that followed, I built a boundary the way I build anything carefully, with clear specifications and no room for ambiguity. I did not cut my mother off entirely. I did not write a letter or post a statement or tell anyone in the extended family what had happened at the ribbon cutting. I didn't need to. 20 people had been standing within earshot, and 3 of them had camera phones. I moved to what I call low contact. I answered my mother's calls on my terms once a week, 15 minutes, Sunday mornings. I set one rule. If she mentioned Daniel's company, the call ended. It took her 4 Sundays to stop testing it. Lauren and I exchanged texts infrequently. She never mentioned the ribbon cutting directly. She never acknowledged the group chat or the bet or the funeral line. But she stopped asking about Brad's business opportunities, which was its own kind of admission. Brad did not get the subcontract, not because Daniel blocked him. Daniel never even knew Brad had pitched it, because Garrett had filed the card and moved on. But because Pierce Builders didn't meet the bonding requirements for the project, the same bonding gap that had cost Brad the water treatment contract before the wedding cost him again, and this time there was no one to blame, but the math. The Ridgemont Register ran a small feature on the modernization project the following month. My mother's name did not appear in it. Daniel's did. And mine, Clare, whole project engineer, appeared in a sidebar about women in infrastructure because the reporter from the ribbon cutting had looked me up and found that I'd been engineering structures since I was 24. I'd earned that sidebar on my own resume, and that mattered more than any reflected glory. On a quiet evening in July, I sat on the porch with Daniel and the cedar box that held Grandma Faye's veil. I unfolded the lace and traced the tiny stitching near the temple one more time. Choose who stays. Faye Monroe had married a well digger. She'd known exactly what she was doing when she stitched those words into a wedding veil and left them for whichever granddaughter was brave enough to need them. On the mantel in the empty spot where the brass coupling had lived, Daniel had placed a new frame, a photo from the wedding. Aunt Ruth in the front pew crying. Me at the altar, veil pinned, smiling. Daniel in his gray suit whispering. The one person who shared my last name, and the one person who was about to. That was my family now. Not the one I was born into. The one I chose, and the one that chose me back. Here is the only thing I know for certain after 33 years. The people who measure you by a business card will never understand the ones who'd hold your ladder at 2 in the morning. So stop handing your worth to anyone who only shows up once the cameras do. That's my story.